Welcome to the debate on France 24. I'm Douglas Herbert. Well, April is the cruelest month, lamented the poet T.S. Eliot. But if you're Barack Obama, this may suddenly seem the cruelest week in the cruelest month. From the streets of Boston to the halls of the U.S. Congress to a small Texas town, the past few days have offered a nonstop breaking news tableau of human tragedy and political brinkmanship. Events that some suggest threaten to cloud Obama's leadership and his legacy. Now, these are just a few of the dramatic images we've seen out of Obama's America in the past few days.
Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
Amendment number 715 was not agreed to.
It should collapse. There, looks like it's jumped out the window.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's all in just 72 hours, I might point out. Now, of course, those twin terrorist bombings near the finish line of the Boston Marathon may not have any connection to the massive blasts that we just saw late Wednesday at a fertilizer plant near Waco, Texas. Now, at this hour, investigators are still scouring for clues in both tragedies. Now, the Senate's rejection of tougher background checks on gun owners is a pure political defeat for Obama, with little apparent link to Boston or Texas. Now, the U.S. Huffington Post, the online magazine, captured the breathless sense of unrelenting bad news for Obama. You can see the first headline there, "No Justice." That was early this morning. A couple of hours later, we had moved on to another new breathless headline, "Texas Horror." Gives you a sense of the roll call, the litany of bad news. Now, for a second term U.S. president, one who's been looking to re-seize the initiative, it may seem like too much grim news all at once. And it makes it plausible to perhaps ask tonight whether this has been the worst week for the Obama presidency. With me this evening to answer that perhaps impossible question is on my right, Cecile Naves. Thanks for joining us. You are a researcher, political scientist, also a member of the think tank Difference, and you're a specialist on neoconservatives on the Tea Party. We'll be talking a lot about that in the second half. And good evening. And on my left here, Laurie Dundon, a familiar face on our show, a fellow with the Truman National Security Project and a former State Department officer. And back to my right, Gerald Olivier, journalist and editor at Atlantico. And you've also written about Mitt Romney. So far only in French, maybe it'll come out in English.
That's right.
And
Let's hope so.
Across the Atlantic, joining us, waiting patiently in Washington, D.C., Josh Kraushaar. Hello, Josh. You are executive editor of the National Journal Hotline, and you are also the writer of a weekly column called Against the Grain. Thanks for joining us as well. Listen, I want to start with the latest and the event with some of the most dramatic images also, the Texas refinery fire. As of this hour, more than 170 injured, the death toll estimated anywhere between 5 and 15. I want you first to hear what the Waco police chief had to say about it just a few hours ago. It's still unsure the circumstances surrounding it.
I will tell you at the beginning that this is a crime scene. We're not indicating that it is a crime, but we don't know. What that means to us is that until we know that it was an industrial accident, we will work it as a crime scene.
So we still don't really know. They're not ruling it out. Could be an industrial accident, could be something more. The date, Laurie Dundon, is a little bit uncanny. Okay, this happened almost 20 years exactly to the date of the Waco siege, a siege in which a sect leader and 81 of his sect followers all died in a mass suicidal fire after a weeks-long standoff with the FBI. Also close to the date of the Oklahoma, Columbine, Virginia Tech shootings, all in different years. Coincidence?
I do think there's a degree of coincidence in the fact that it's the same week. They didn't harmonize on a particular anniversary date. Often many of the texts, will, if they want to send that message, will focus on a particular day, a particular date itself. But I think this reoccurrence reminds us that the threat of terrorism, domestic, foreign, homegrown, is constantly there. We may become more and more complacent each time we pass by a couple of years and there's no major event, but we can't forget it's still there, and it's still a dominant concern of our leaders.
Josh, I want to ask you, you're watching this obviously from Washington. What's your sense here? Because, after the Boston bombings, people, started talking terror right away, the flashbacks to 9/11, all of that. Some people said don't rush to judgment. What are you thinking when you see this Texas refinery fertilizer plant blast today?
Well, it's very unsettling, and like you said, it just comes at a week in which the president has had so much on his plate, from gun control to the Boston bombings to what's happened in Texas. From what I've heard, that there's skepticism among White House and congressional circles that there is a terrorist or any kind of deliberate attempt to connect it to the Texas blast overnight, but there's still just so much uncertainty with everything. We really just don't know much about the perpetrators in the Boston bombings. We don't know what caused the Waco bombings, and that there's a sense of dread and anxiety here in Washington, both congressionally and at the White House.
And there's a sense, as we saw before, a sort of toggling back and forth from one tragedy, one disaster to another. Just a little while ago, Barack Obama attended an interfaith service for the victims of Boston. Now we're moving back to Boston, not Texas anymore. And I just want to listen very quickly to one poignant moment of that message.
We may be momentarily knocked off our feet, but we'll pick ourselves up. We'll keep going. We will finish the race.
Gerald, Olivier, this does not sound like a leader who is defeated by what's happening. Obviously, it's been a tragic week. He sounds like he still has a lot of fighting spirit there.
Well, yes, he does, and he should. It's a very sad circumstance, what happened in Boston, but Obama is a very, very good speaker. He can convey this type of emotion. He's on his best terrain, and is someone that can warm people's heart and do a lot of good through these speeches. So there's no reason why he should feel down, and he's not on political turf there. But you mentioned a little earlier regarding what happened in Texas, the fact that the date was almost the same as the one of the Waco tragedy.
1993.
That was 1993, yeah. April 19th. And today is April 18th, plus 17th at night. I don't know what time it was when the thing happened over there. But when the Oklahoma bombing occurred, it occurred on April 19th, 1995, and Tim McVeigh, the person responsible for this bombing, along with Mike Nichols, during his trial, said clearly that he had done it as a way to revenge what happened at Waco. So the fact that it happened with a one-day difference makes me think that it is not connected to that incident. Otherwise,
it would have been on the day
It would
itself.
have been on that specific date. Exactly.
Marie Cecile, I want to ask you, do you think we tend to sort of read too much into these dates? On whatever date this might have happened, we would have looked for some other things that it coincided with.
Yeah, it's difficult to say, to make, hypotheses about that, because we don't really know what happened. So what strikes me is that when Barack Obama was reelected, he was reelected with a very important result. And I thought, well, it means that America is behind him now. There is a kind of, consensus about his re-election. And actually, it seems not to be the case. And it's a bit frightening for the rest of his mandate, because whoever is responsible for those attacks, we might fear that something else happens
now. But wait,
now.
are you suggesting then, when you say that it's not the case that the country's behind him, that would suggest a homegrown attack, in your opinion, something domestic, not?
Well, it's hard to say, but it seems that things are.
We're talking maybe a right-wing militant type, like a Timothy McVeigh, possibly. We have no idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to
Anyway,
turn
it gives food for thought to conspiracionists.
to the conspiracy theorists, exactly. Josh, you're still patiently standing by. I want to turn to politics now, and an issue that you have written about today or yesterday, you correct me, in the National Journal. You basically wrote on the gun control bill, which was voted down in the Senate, rejected by a vote of 54-46. You said Obama misread the politics of gun control. At least that was the headline, and this was the quote from your piece. If this doesn't demonstrate the limitations of the president's political muscle, I don't know what does. Barack Obama, do you think he was truly surprised by this defeat? Did it come out of nowhere? Did he think he had the votes?
I don't know if he thought he had the votes, but he definitely spent a whole lot of political capital in the last couple of weeks going to visit Connecticut, doing a bunch of campaign-style rallies in support of gun control. And because there was this piece of legislation that was backed by 2 senators with strong support traditionally from the NRA, he thought he found this face-saving compromise on gun control that could win him political support and actually get some movement when it comes to gun background checks. So I think there was a sense of optimism about a week or two ago that there was a real chance of this getting 60 votes, of having very bipartisan support in the Senate. And that just fell apart over the last 48 hours in the context of all this crisis also taking place all around all around him in Boston. So it's a political setback, and it's also coming at the worst time, given that immigration reform is next on the docket.
We're going to talk about immigration reform in a little while, but could you just try to explain, remember, international audience here, most of our viewers not in the U.S., how is it that this bill, which was already very much watered down, it was no ban on assault weapons, no ban on higher capacity ammunition magazines, plus he brought all of the victims of the Newtown families, the families of the victims, into Washington to personally plead. With all of that, it still went down to defeat.
Yeah, in the Senate, small state senators, folks from states with high concentrations of gun ownership are overrepresented. And there are a lot of Democrats in the South and Democrats from states like Alaska who voted against this compromise. So he didn't even have his entire party with him on the issue. And then almost every Republican, save for several exceptions, voted against it. So it was an issue, a regional issue, as much as a political one. And Democrats tried desperately to lobby some of these holdouts, these Democratic holdouts, till the very end. And that came, if they got all the Democrats on their side, they would have become very close to getting the 60 votes necessary.
Laurie, Dundon, the polls show, when you take these national polls, they show Americans sort of not overwhelmingly united, but by a majority, vast majority in favor of stricter gun controls. And then you get down, as you hear Josh saying, get down to these regional levels, and all of a sudden all bets are off. Does this surprise you, or is this sort of just the way American politics are right now?
Well, I think that's where we're at the moment, and this trend has been going on, though, for a little bit of a while, because it matches also with redistricting that's occurred in the last years. As congressional representatives, for example, become more and more protected with district lines that have been reshaped and redefined over the last years, their biggest possible competitor, their biggest possible concern coming up in the next election is not necessarily someone from the other party, but someone from within their own party saying, you're not conservative enough, you're not liberal enough. And so you end up getting the threat more from the center, going to the center. Taking compromise action is actually sometimes more of a threat to your own reelection.
Cecile, I'm curious what you think of this. Do you see this sort of fear of the hard right in American politics? Senators who normally might have voted their conscience or felt differently about this bill felt pressured not to because of these constituents.
Yeah, we can assume it because the 4 senators from the Democrat Party who voted against the law.
4 Democrats.
Yeah,
right.
4 Democrats. Yep. Are from conservative states, North Dakota, Arkansas, and so on. And in these states, there are very huge conservative forces against the federal state, against the role of the government. So, yeah, we can assume it. And I would like to add that the forces of opposition in America are very strong, and it's a real problem for democracy, in my opinion, because due to the financial way of the NRA and so on, sometimes even the Democratic Party makes the choice to support pro-guns.
You bring up Marie Cecile, the NRA, very interesting, because I want to bring up now for our viewers something that Gabrielle Giffords. She's the former Democratic Congresswoman. She was from Arizona. You'll remember, most of you might remember. She was shot at point-blank range in Arizona 2 years ago, and she's become a very big advocate for gun control. Look what she wrote. She wrote, "Speaking is physically difficult for me." This was in the New York Times, opinion. "But my feelings are clear. I'm furious. I will not rest until we've righted the wrong these senators have done, and until we have changed our laws so we can look parents in the face and say, we are trying to keep your children safe. We cannot allow the status quo, desperately protected by the gun lobby, so that they can make more money by spreading fear and misinformation," to go on. Gerald, Olivier, the gun lobby, special interests, are they intimidating and bullying politicians in America?
The NRA might be. That's pretty much the tactic they adopted in this debate. But there are two things that you have to remember regarding this vote. The first is that even if the vote had passed in the Senate, it would have been voted down in the House. Therefore, senators whose job is on the line, as Marie-Cecile was saying, knowing the bill was going to be defeated anywhere, were unlikely to vote for it. Now, it came down to actually only one vote, if you think about it, because 4 Republicans crossed party line and were willing to vote for it, and actually did. There are 55 Democrats. You had 4 Republicans, you come to 59. They were one short of 60. And then since they didn't have the 60, the 4 Democrats didn't bother voting for the bill.
It would have had to be modified.
But the second thing you have to remember is that the Senate is doing its part. We were talking about earlier the fact that you said 90% of Americans would have supported such a bill. Maybe. But the fact is that the Constitution was written in such a way that the Senate has 2 representatives per state, regardless of population.
Regardless of the...
And rural states always have a voice in favor of gun rights. And that is a balance which is heavy in this debate.
And disproportionate, perhaps.
It may be in this debate, but that's how the Constitution and the system was built up.
Very briefly, Laurie Dunn, very briefly, there's the old political refrain that Washington is the place that reform goes to die. That seems truer now more than ever in Washington. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think they're taking on a number of ambitious initiatives, but that's not surprising in a second-term presidency in any case. Gun control wasn't an issue that President Obama necessarily picked. It was a reactive issue in response to the Newton tragedies. But there are other reforms he's certainly going to try to go forward with, immigration being the next one, and I think part of our conversation.
You really picked up...
We're going to talk... No. We're going to come back to that, because very important issue, one of his key planks of his agenda. We're going to continue discussing. We got away from the question, is it perhaps Obama's worst week of his presidency after a lot of tragedies in the U.S.? But we'll be back for the second half of the debate after a little bit of news very shortly.